That's right, I am not Areeb Siddiqui, but I am a Siddiqui, and I'm joined today by... Guys, I was in full flow.
That was very good.
Can I quickly film a thing where I talk about only 10% of you subscribed? Can that come from me on this episode? Okay.
95% of people told us that they really strongly desired an alternative to conventional financial services. But then when we asked them, are you currently doing anything about it? Are you using any of these Islamic banks or these fintechs that are coming up? Only 3% of them said, yeah, they are. When you're running a startup, I think the best founders are constantly experimenting, right? You have this idea, you have this hypothesis about what's going to work. In our case, Muslims want to bank and invest in a way that aligns with their faith. Here's the best way to do it, whether it's with our consumer app, with a budgeting tool, with X, Y, Z. We have privileges.
Yeah.
We have unfair advantages. We have skills and talents. We should be using those things to follow in the footsteps of the giants who came before us, to take control of our finances, invest in our future, and ultimately for our akhiras.
My next guest, also my first guest, is someone who needs no introduction. I am not Areeb Siddiqui, but I am a Siddiqui, and I am joined today by the Siddiqui, Areeb Siddiqui, the founder and CEO of Kestrl, the Muslim money app. Today we'll be exploring his journey of how he went from a corporate career in the city to an MBA at the University of Cambridge, and then finally onto Kestrl itself. What it is, why it is, and what it looks to do in the future, as well as anything and all things related. Before we go further, we just noticed that only about 10% of you subscribed. That's really not good enough. I think if you looked at the amount of content that you're benefiting from on this channel, you'd really want to subscribe so you can get that straight into your inbox. So if I were you, I'd go and click the subscribe button right now and benefit from more of this content. So, without further ado, Areeb, thank you so much for joining me. It sounds weird to be just calling you by your name. Also weird to be sitting in the guest seats once again, despite now being the host. So if I may start off this podcast by making something of a reference, I might say, well, how are the turntables?
Well, this was a lot for our usual. So for our usual listeners, you may be wondering what is going on. A few people had said they wanted me as the guest. So we've turned the tables. And yeah, I'm the guest, and a lot of people really liked having my brother on the show and what it was like, and apparently I don't know why. So we brought him in as host today. So yeah, he's taking that responsibility very seriously. Why am I staying in the usual seat? Because I like this side of my face better. So thanks for calling that out.
It's good of you to admit that on camera. Yeah. So
it's been a rush today, to be honest. It's like, I don't know, we were late into the studio and I should have got a haircut before this, and I don't know. Inshallah, it'll go well.
I did that on your behalf.
Yes. There you go.
So I actually want to start off with something a little bit different, which you don't normally get asked about, which is just before any of this, before what's now this sort of sprawling thing that is Kestrl, wind the clock right back. What did you study at university?
So I did my undergraduate degree at University College London, UCL, same as you. Yep. But I did physics, actually, with more of a lean towards astrophysics.
So talk to me about that. Was there any indication or hint at the time that finance, let alone Islamic finance, might be something that you were interested in, or was this something just completely out of left field?
I mean, look, I think like many Muslims in this country, I didn't really have much of an idea of Islamic finance growing up. I think I'd heard whispers of it at university. Everyone knew that interest or riba was non-Sharia compliant and we should avoid it. We didn't have savings accounts for that reason. And I think it mainly came into my mind when it came to the concept of a student loan, which I think is a very emotive issue today, where a lot of students are figuring out, should we go for a student loan? Is university even on the agenda for me? And different scholars, as you know, have different takes on that situation. But no, I didn't have an idea of Islamic finance. When it came to financial services, that was a very different story. So as you know, our father has been in financial services for close to 40 years now. And I think whether you like it or not, you are greatly influenced by your parents and what they have done before you. So I think growing up, there was always this idea that at some point I'm going to end up in and around financial services. I'd done, I don't want to say internships, but during school, like between GCSEs and A-levels, I'd gone and shadowed him at work for like 2 weeks and lived in the city and saw what that life was like. So I always just thought that was what was going to happen. And physics was my little way of rebelling almost, in that I didn't want to just go and do economics at LSE and do the usual kind of path to banking. I actually really wanted to do zoology. That was my real passion. Especially as you know, into big cats and tigers especially. That's really what I wanted to do. But coming from a background like ours, most immigrant backgrounds, even non-immigrant backgrounds, a lot of parents are very concerned with how on earth you're going to be making a living. And me being the eldest child, the eldest of the three of us brothers, I think my parents were particularly focused on what on earth I was going to be doing. I was the first to run the experiment out of all of us, I guess. So yeah, they were okay with me doing physics. It wasn't quite econ or maths or finance, but there was strong enough previous evidence of people studying degrees like physics or like mathematics and then ending up with roles in the city that they were kind of okay with it.
Interesting. And is there any part of your degree that you would say you kind of use today or have used in recent working history?
Usually I would say no, but really thinking about it, the part I loved about my degree the most was the experimentation. So we would spend about 6 hours a week in the lab. And when you're running a startup, I think the best founders are constantly experimenting, right? You have this idea, you have this hypothesis about what's going to work. In our case, Muslims want to bank and invest in a way that aligns with their faith. Here's the best way to do it, whether it's with our consumer app, with the budgeting tool, with X, Y, Z. But you want to be constantly iterating and testing out that hypothesis in as quick a means and methodology as possible.
Right.
So a lot of founders and startup advisors today say that you should try and be rapidly testing within like 2-week periods, like a sprint, and whatever you can do in that. So I guess in that way, yeah, there are a lot of carryovers between the science and the scientific methodology and running a business, especially in the startup stage.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that connection before between experimental physics or being in a lab versus running a business. But,
I would just say, from like an elder brother perspective, you did benefit from me.
I'm not denying that. That's
no,
a separate topic.
No, but what I'm saying is, what did you study at university?
So I studied classics.
Right. Yeah. So
which,
classics. What is that? Dead languages.
That's a controversial statement and one that we can get onto maybe in a separate podcast.
But I think, but I want to make this point that, yeah, you studied Latin and ancient Greek.
Yeah, with the understanding that I would always do law after that. Sorry to any of my professors who are watching this. Sorry to break your heart. But yes, the idea was that I would eventually do a vocational subject. So I would just...
And you're a lawyer today, but yes. I think the point is for anyone who's watching and listening and thinking, oh, what on earth should I be doing at university?
Yeah.
The big takeaway for me, and something I really wish I knew before applying, was that it doesn't, for most careers, it doesn't really matter what it is that you study at university, unless you're going into to do medicine or to become an architect or something of that ilk. In reality, all that really matters when it comes to applying for these roles, whether it's in the city or in marketing or in some cases like data science as well, all they really care about is the brand of the university.
Yeah,
brand name.
To a lesser extent, perhaps how well you do at the subject.
For sure, but in most cases, as long as you got a 2-1, then you're fine.
Yeah, no,
right?
it's...
So, but I think if anyone is thinking about it, I would say look at what you are best at right now, whether it's English Lit or maths or French, and don't worry about what people are saying, and just think, what is the highest ranked university that I can get into? Because most employers, I think, care about that the most, whether it's fair or not. I'm not saying it is fair. In most cases, it's not. But there is a preference for that.
Yeah, it's a weird world in which we operate. I think that there have been attempts for that to change in recent years, but broadly speaking, I think that trend still follows, that the name and the prestige, I suppose, of where you studied is still an influential factor in job applications. And I think that's a good segue, because I was going to go on to then you telling us about your journey then at the beginning of your career. So you started at Deloitte. So tell us about that. Like, what was the inspiration for that? Where did it lead to? How did you find it there?
So I was in my second year of university, having done physics at UCL, and there was, I think the group of us, my friend group and those who were studying with me, they were split into 2 camps. There was a group that was quite content and wasn't really concerned about the future because they were going on to do masters and they were going to do PhDs and stay within this university. And maybe some of them were thinking about other places like Imperial or Oxbridge. But then there was another group who were really focused on getting out and what that would be. So I think that was really where I fell into. And I was thinking, should I be applying for summer vacation schemes? So I shot off applications, not really that targeted. I kind of knew that I wanted to look at big four firms. Big four firms being Deloitte, PwC, KPMG, and EY, or Ernst & Young. And those are the big four consulting, advisory, and accounting firms that are here. So I shot off applications to each of them. The first one that came back was Deloitte. And really interestingly, they said, sorry, our summer vacation scheme is actually full. So I thought this was a standard rejection email, but alhamdulillah, I actually ended up reading the rest of it. And they said, but if you would like, do you want to apply for a grad scheme? And I wrote back and said, look, I've not finished university. I've got another year to go for undergrad. And they said, that's fine. If you pass this interview stage, we'll hold the place for you for a year, as long as you get a 2-1. So alhamdulillah, it was quite a relatively unique situation. Most people do internships in their second year with the idea that if it goes well, they may be given a job offer at the end of it. So I went for that. It was quite a standard process. You go in for this assessment center where you have to pretend like emails are coming in to this. You log into this computer, pretend emails are coming in. You need to prioritize and figure out which one to reply to. There's no spell check. They test really weird things
in hindsight,
at these companies.
It can be quite weird. I did some of those as well.
And then there's like an assessment with a senior manager within the team where they're just asking you, tell me about a time you had to deal with a problem, or you worked in a team, or you felt like you made a mistake, and all those kinds of questions. But those interviews, the best ones are really when it turns into more of a general chat, is what I find. And they pick out something interesting on your CV and really hone in on that. For me, I was writing blogs in the science space. So they really liked that. And I also used to make silly videos about science, which they liked as well. So again, nothing to do with what I was actually going to apply for, which was consulting in the financial services space. And then the final thing was I had to give a presentation on what I thought was going to happen to the asset and wealth management industry over the next 5 years. So I gave that to 2 partners, and then alhamdulillah, I ended up getting in.
And did what you projected for the next 5 years come to fruition?
I don't even remember what I said, to be honest, but I remember thinking I really like this presenting thing. I'd done it before at university and at school, but I'd never done it in the context of like a career. But I really liked getting up there and trimming down the slides so that they were presentationally more efficient and all that kind of thing. But I got in. So I did my final year. I'd said bye-bye to my master's. I wasn't going to do that. And I started on a 3-year graduate scheme. And you asked me what I liked about it. I loved it. I think a lot of people have mixed feelings about this, but I really, really enjoyed my 3 years at Deloitte because it felt like university phase 2 almost, because suddenly you're in there with people your age, similar-ish background to you, or from all kinds of different areas as well. But you're all studying together, you're working together, and you're just suddenly exposed to this entire world which you didn't even imagine was actually out there before, right? Which in my case was banking and wealth management. And thankfully, fintech began to come to the forefront there as well. And you talk about it being university phase 2. I guess part of that is the fact that, especially at the Big Four, there tends to be very large Muslim networks. So what was that like? And did that influence or start to sow the seeds of, I mean, that was my first interaction with Islamic finance, actually. So at the time, Deloitte Muslim Network was big. I think out of all the corporate networks in London, they were the biggest out there. And they would do regular events, big Eid parties, Ramadan events, all of that. I think the closest thing to that right now is arguably the EY Muslim Network. It's cyclical like that. But through that, we were assigned mentors. Like if you wanted, you could sign up to a mentor within that. And my mentor that was assigned to me was a lady called Hazra Munshi, who, Hazra, if you're listening, she's a shareholder over at Kestrl now, and is a very senior director over at Deloitte, but based in Dubai. Now, actually. But Hazra had the idea of putting on a series for Islamic finance within the firm. So there was this idea that we weren't doing enough in Islamic finance for our clients over in the Middle East in particular. And so we should be upskilling our staff. So we would bring in experts, similar to this podcast, actually, thinking about back on it. So we'd bring on people like Faisal Karbani, who runs Simply Ethical, right, to talk about the idea of what makes a Sharia compliant investment. And anyone could dial into these webinars. And we would get sometimes hundreds of people from all across the global Deloitte network dialing into this to learn about Islamic finance. And that was my real first exposure to this. At the time when I was thinking about careers in the space, though, I would look into what was already out there. Al Rayan Bank, then known as Islamic Bank of Britain, and Gatehouse would come up, but they weren't really places where I could really see myself building a career for myself. It seemed almost like everyone there was very, very senior.
They don't really have grad schemes.
But that was my first exposure to Islamic finance.
That's interesting. I was going to ask actually what your introduction to it was. So makes sense. And then how did you go from Deloitte to the MBA? What was the kind of road that?
So the grad scheme I loved. But the thing about being on a graduate scheme, so bear this in mind for anyone who's out there or thinking about graduate schemes, is that when it comes to salary bands, so when I say a salary band, if you're going in at a associate or senior associate level within a company, there's a range of salary. Say it's like, okay, your associate, you could be paid anywhere between 25 to 40,000 pounds, right? They keep that range there for negotiation purposes, people who come in from other places, who may be being paid something before. Not everyone comes in straight from university. When you come in as a grad, you don't have a previous salary. You have no negotiating power in most cases. They're always going to put you at the lower end of that salary band. And when you get promoted, you'll be promoted to the next lowest end of the salary band, and so on and so forth. And I was made very aware of this because a friend of mine joined when I had just finished my graduate scheme after 3 years. A friend of mine joined at the same level. Fahad, if he's listening, is now over at Barclays. And we were just talking, and somehow he dropped his salary into the conversation. And I was thinking, that's really different from my salary. And we're exactly the same level.
It's awkward.
Right? So I had a conversation with the partner on my team, and they explained this concept. And then I thought, well, I think I just need to leave and become like an experienced hire within another firm to negotiate that. So that was the idea that I can't stay in this firm forever. Until that point, I'd really drunk the Kool-Aid of Deloitte, where they had said, you come in as a graduate and within 10 years, you'll be a partner, right? And you'll be an equity owner in the firm and you'll be a millionaire and you'll have made it. When you actually join, you'll realize how difficult that actually is, and also how much politics comes in to play, as well as, especially at the time, putting yourselves in situations that you may not feel comfortable in as a Muslim, where to ingratiate yourselves with the higher up, sometimes you'll be in situations like there's a lot of alcohol flowing, maybe you're doing trips to the pub and or drinks evenings and things like that, where as a Muslim you don't really feel like you fit in there. So anyway, I ended up applying. I found this firm called Alpha FMC, Alpha Financial Markets Consulting. It's called consulting. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, Alpha Financial Markets Consulting. And thankfully I got a place in there. And I was there for 2 years, and that was intense. I went from a firm with thousands of people to only being one of about 120 people within this little, almost startup consulting firm. They were doing similar things to Deloitte, but the difference was because there were so few of us, despite me being still relatively junior, only with about 3 years of experience, I was going in and being like one of only 2 people, and in some cases, the only person on a client site, facing off with very senior people like chief operating officers, chief compliance officers, and having to weirdly opine on their strategies, right? Which was a weird situation to be in. And it really was like a trial by fire.
Is that intimidating at all?
It was at first, but then I really saw not genius, but the secret behind consulting is really fake it until you make it.
Right, as they say, I just asked because it's very different from the legal world where, firstly, we don't really go to the client's sites. Like, if anything, they come to us, or these days we just have calls on Teams. And the advice is, it's different in that respect. And it's more to do with the contractual drafting. And you can sort of be more behind the scenes in a sense.
Whereas with consulting, I think there's definitely a lot of that, but there's also a lot of FaceTime being important and being out there on client side and presenting this idea. There's definitely clients who take issues with it. I think this is an issue in management consulting in general, where you'll be going in there speaking to people sometimes double your age, and they're like, what on earth can this guy tell me about my own industry that I don't already know? But often the decision to engage with consultants is being made by higher ups. And I think it's affecting the consulting industry a lot in today's world. Like, should people actually be paying for consultants? As a business owner today, I'd never pay for a consultant.
Right.
Right. I wouldn't really see the value in that, especially not at our stage of company anyway.
Yeah.
But what happened at Alpha was two things happened. I was really exposed to fintechs, the world of fintech. Like one of the first projects I was actually on was helping one of the first robo-advisors in this country, and most well-known robo-advisors called Nutmeg, which was coming up with this model, which allowed people for the first time to invest through an app into a whole range of portfolios with different risk weightings, from low risk and low returns to high risk and high returns, all with the touch of a button, which back in 2015, 2016 was still pretty new. And of course, that's how Wahid works today, Wahid Invest. So I got to work on that and come up with the strategy paper. That was one of the first things I did. The other thing that happened was the project that really made me think I need to leave this firm.
Okay.
And I was a couple of years in, but it was Ramadan, and it was Ramadan in 2018. Okay. And if you remember back then, Ramadan was really hard in this country.
Yeah.
It was like 18-hour fasts, and the heat was intense.
Hay fever.
Sure. Yeah.
I'll never forget that Ramadan in 2018. Anyway, go on.
Yeah, it was tough. But do you remember what I was doing during that time?
Yeah, you were in Glasgow.
Yeah, I was being sent back and forth to Glasgow, which was fine. Of course, that's the job.
Yeah.
But it was intense because we thought we had it bad in London. In Scotland, the fasts were like almost 21 hours. So you've got a 3-hour window to eat and drink and pray and do Tarawih and all of this.
And you were working there each week, and you would come back?
Yeah, I would fly out there 3 or 4 days a week, and then I'd come back.
Yeah.
And every evening, I would spend in the office. Time which I would usually spend breaking my fast with family at home, or going to the mosque to pray Tarawih prayers. I remember sitting there eating. I think I'd ordered like a Wagamama's, like a very sad meal on my own. Sitting at the top of this beautiful building in London. I can't say which one, otherwise it will reveal the client, but this beautiful building. But I was sat there on my own at midnight whilst you and the rest of the family were all at Tarawih prayers. And I was just like, well...
London or Glasgow?
In London, right? Okay. In London on this night. I was just thinking, I need to get out.
Yeah.
Right. I can't do this life forever. And the final nail in the coffin was really, during such a spiritual time in this month, I was really thinking, is this the best use of my abilities? Right. I was really grappling with this idea of, for some reason, Allah had chosen this path for me in and around financial services. Yet at the same time, making my money doing things which weren't exactly halal. Yes, there are steps removed from the actual interest generating process, but still, it's an industry which benefits from the generation of riba. And I think anyone in that should be concerned and asking questions about how that's going to affect your afterlife, your akhirah. And I heard a really interesting lecture at that time by Numan Ali Khan, who was talking about the dua that was made by the Prophet Suleiman AS. And it like really stuck with me to this day. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yeah, I know the dua.
So the dua that was made, and when you think about the prayer that is made by a prophet, you'd often think that, they're going to be praying for forgiveness, for the akhirah, for future generations, for their ummah. But this dua was very, very different, and I'm gonna butcher the translation. But we'll put up I think the actual thing. Yeah. But it was, the first thing that he asked for is, "Oh my Lord, forgive me." And then after that, he asks, "Grant me a kingdom. Grant me a kingdom, the likes of which no one else after me will ever receive."
Wow.
And at first, it's really strange to hear that. Because when you think of a prophet of God, you think they're not going to be asking for worldly success. So what is happening here? And here you have someone who's asking to be granted a kingdom, and not just a kingdom, but so large that no one else will ever be able to compete with that to come. So what was going on there? And then Numan Ali Khan put it very well, where he said, to understand this, you need to look at the first line of this, which is, "Oh my Lord, oh my Master, forgive me." Right? Yeah. And there it's like, okay, we're all here for a very limited amount of time. No one knows when we're going to go. And in that time, we pray that we use that time as efficiently as possible. And when we go, what do we leave behind us?
A legacy.
A legacy, but also this idea that the only thing that will remain, which will be able to ask for forgiveness on our behalves and continue to do good deeds, is what's called in Islam Sadaqah Jariyah.
Yeah.
The good that we leave behind.
Ongoing charity.
Ongoing, exactly.
Or beneficial knowledge, or a righteous child that prays for you.
Exactly. Yeah. So for different people, that looks like different things.
Yeah.
For some people, it's children. They're blessed with children. Not everyone is given that gift. For other people, they're able to use their wealth to build a mosque or to build a school. Or something else that benefits society in some way and will earn reward for them even long after they're gone. Now, we're all given different gifts and different opportunities and privileges. Even the prophets, right? Isa alayhi salam, Jesus was able to perform miracles. Dawood alayhi salam, David was able to bend metal with his bare hands. All kinds of things. Musa alayhi salam, Moses, was incredibly strong.
Yeah.
But what was Suleiman alayhi salam, Solomon's real gift?
I guess dominion.
Governance, leadership. Yeah. He was able to lead and govern in such a way without becoming corrupted by that, falling foul of what every single empire in history, from the Mesopotamians, the Romans, the Egyptians, and to an extent the Islamic empires as well, eventually fall foul to corruption. And what he had identified is that I have this gift. Please let me use this gift so that I can better secure my afterlife and benefit society as a whole. And subhanAllah, that struck me. That really shook me to my core. And I thought, what on earth have I been given? All the privileges that I've been given. Right now, I've just been floating through life, making money, and things have been coming really easily to me. There was like this trend in my life that, I applied for this and I got it immediately. I applied for Deloitte and it came super easy. I wanted to get out of Deloitte. The first thing I applied to, I got it really easy. There was no hardship there. So what was the reason for all of this? Why was I doing any of this? And I didn't know. I really didn't know. So for me, it came in that I need to step away from this for a while. And I began to apply for MBA programs, a Master's in Business Administration. And I looked at America, way too expensive. So then I looked here in the UK. There's only 3 schools at the time which were worth talking about, although there are many others now, which were London Business School, Cambridge, and Oxford. I applied to all 3. I chose Cambridge for a variety of reasons. And alhamdulillah, I didn't know what was going to happen to my life. I just said to Alpha, please, I just want to go on secondment for a year. Hold my place for me. I'll come back afterwards. But in reality, I was thinking I want to go and like find something and figure out what it is I want to do. And alhamdulillah, it was at this university, at Cambridge, at this year that I took out, that Kestrl was born.
Yeah, wow, that was an incredible answer. Definitely took us on a journey. Yeah, it's interesting because I was actually going to ask you what is your favorite story from Quran with regards to money, but I think you might have, at least when it comes to a specific verse, you might have covered it. But we can get on to that. I mean, I think the prefacing of that worldly request with ultimately a request for forgiveness, I think is, likewise what strikes me, that yes, there is scope for asking God for worldly success, but it's not at the expense of your ultimate destination, which
for
is
sure
that was at the forefront of the dua, the request of Suleiman alayhi salam. And I guess that is a good footprint or blueprint for anyone who's a Muslim looking to seek out what to do with their wealth or how to build it in a way that is still consistent with their
or indeed what to do with their lives. It's the most common thing that students or young people who just started out working come and ask me, like, what should I be doing with my life? And my advice to you is really figure that thing out. What are you so good at? And that talent that can be used to really benefit society. What are those things? What does that intersect between the two? And that's really what you should be trying to focus on.
Right. The Muslim Ikigai.
The Muslim Ikigai, as Iqbal Nassim puts it.
Yeah, so that was a good segue into the MBA itself. And tell us a little bit about that. Obviously, that is where Kestrl was born, but how did exactly it come about? And what was your favorite kind of module as well on the MBA? And
My favorite module. So for people who don't know, the Cambridge MBA, there's different kinds of MBAs you can do. There's like 2-year ones, which is like the Harvard Business School model. And then there are 1-year ones, which Cambridge and Oxford, and I think at London Business School, you can cut it down to an 18-month and even a 12-month one if you really wanted to. That really appealed to me because the biggest element I was looking at was salary sacrifice, not just the cost, because these things are almost inordinately expensive as well, especially if you don't get in with a scholarship. Alhamdulillah, I was able to secure a scholarship of some kind, not full, but partial, which made it a lot easier. And if your company's not paying for it, then you want to consider the cost, and you also want to consider the salary sacrifice. So 1 year was what I wanted to do. So the other appeal of going to Cambridge was that you're not just part of the business school, you're part of the larger university, and that means you get the full experience. You're living in a college, in dorms. You have a bicycle. I would cycle to the business school and to my classes every day, and you really feel like you're part of the larger university and the larger over 800-year plus legacy, which, as we'll hear in the story, really came to help later down the line. And it's split into 4 terms or 4 semesters: Michaelmas, Lent, Easter, and then summer term. Michaelmas term runs, it's from the September to December time. And that's where you do your core modules: the accounting, the economics, the corporate finance, the bare basics of like business. And after that, you get to pick your own modules. The ones that really affected me the most, and I have to make this clear for anyone thinking about doing an MBA, should you do an MBA? It really depends. It really, really depends. It's true that I would not have started my own business had it not been for the MBA. But in reality, you should only do an MBA for 2 reasons, and 2 reasons only. Number 1 is the brand name of the school that you're going to. And number 2 is the network that you gain when you're studying there. Because you're studying with a group of high-performing, highly ambitious people who you're betting are going to become very senior and very influential one day in time. And you'll be friends with them for life. That's the idea. It's a group of 150 to 200 people who you'll be able to call upon in any part of the world. Now notice when I said those 2 things, I didn't say the knowledge. Because the truth is, anything that you learn on an MBA, and the school's not going to like me saying this, apologies if you're listening, you can actually learn for free or at very low cost through books or online on the internet. And that's the truth. So I would only advise doing an MBA if it's from a really, really reputable brand name. If it's in the US, all the top schools, Harvard Business School, Yale, Stanford, the like. In the UK, it's really those 3, although Imperial is doing very well now as well. But yeah, the one module that really affected me was entrepreneurship. Which was in module 1, because I had no ambitions to be an entrepreneur. I really didn't. When I joined, I didn't know what I was going to do, but I thought maybe I'll go back into consulting, but in a different field. Maybe I'll find something in Islamic finance, maybe in consulting. But I didn't. The plan was never to start my own business. And we had a really interesting, if not a little eccentric professor called Simon Stockley, who just opened my eyes to the possibility of entrepreneurship and what it could be. And we looked at things like the startup business canvas, which is a really good way of visualizing and assessing an idea very rapidly from what the revenue sources are, what the costs are, looking at the competitors and what the landscape is and different models that could work. So yeah, I mean, look that up. So that's what I really got out of the MBA. And of course, meeting my eventual co-founder, Daing Tramizi, which was the ultimate game changer for me.
So how did you meet him, and what exactly was it in your interactions with him that led to ultimately Kestrl today?
Yeah, so Daing, we've had him on the podcast before, along with one of our other co-founders, Irfan Razi. Daing and I were one of the few Muslims on the course, which meant just naturally you get to know the other Muslims. You're seeking out prayer rooms at the same time together. You're looking for halal food around campus together. So naturally we would hang out a lot. And in our conversations, we would talk about what our backgrounds were. And unlike here in the UK, where Islamic banking is considered a niche, in Malaysia, it's pretty much the norm. Either they have full-blown Islamic banks, or every bank worth talking about in Malaysia has their own Islamic window of some kind. And Daing had worked for the Central Bank of Malaysia, Bank Negara, where his specialty was in retail Islamic banking, looking at products for retail consumption. And we just used to kick around this idea, what if we could take what I had learned in fintech and fintech strategy and compliance and regulation here in the UK, combine it with what he knew about Islamic banking to do something. And we used to kick around this idea like over lunch, and there's this cafe down the road from the business school called Hot Numbers, and we would talk there a lot. But then a couple of things happened. One was Wahid Invest was really on the rise at that point. and they got covered in the Financial Times.
Yeah.
So we were sitting in the library and we saw this article and we were like, that's really interesting. And here we had a graduate from Chicago Booth Business School who was going it on his own and launching this robo-advisor, right? But with an Islamic tilt to it.
Yeah.
The second thing was we saw an increase in the number of Islamic digital banks. This was 2019.
Right. 18 to 19. Yeah.
Yeah. So this was 2019. This was happening, right?
Okay.
So we saw these people who were launching digital banks, but Islamic.
Okay.
And the critique that we would always levy is, how are they really Islamic?
Right.
Are you not just literally being Monzo for Muslims, but in reality your business model is exactly the same and you're just slapping Islamic on top of it, right? So that's what we were thinking about. And then the idea was really cemented when randomly, so the Cambridge Mosque had just opened, the famous Cambridge Eco Mosque, which is this beautiful masjid in the center of Cambridge. People go there just to view that masjid today. And we were sat there and Dying recognized someone in Jummah. And he says, I think that guy is the chairman of HSBC Amana, which is HSBC's Islamic banking arm.
Yeah.
And Dying recognized him because when he was very, very junior, he used to just sit in the meetings and take minutes and things like that. Right. So he went up to him, introduced ourselves, and we found out that his daughter was actually studying Dr. Ashraf Iqbal, I should say. Dr. Ashraf Iqbal, who was our first ever mentor and advisor on Kestrl. Former chairman of HSBC Amana. Now he's working for a Somali bank, a Somali Labuan mixed entity called Wafi. Okay. But his daughter was studying at the same college that I was at, Homerton College at Cambridge. And he was very gracious with his time. He sat down with us and he really encouraged us to go for it because there was a gap in the market, but we needed research. So in the summer term, the fourth term of the MBA, you can do pretty much whatever you want. You could do a research project, you can go and do an internship, you can even start working if you want. And I had, during the MBA, secured another role for myself. Right. This time at PwC, so another big four firm. I'd already gotten that offer. And I thought, should I start it now? Come to June, I had another 3 months on the MBA. Or maybe should we delay this a bit? And we chose to do that. Let's delay this and let's actually test this idea. Okay. So we developed what we called the Great British Islamic Banking Survey.
Oh, I remember this.
Yeah. So we printed off all these leaflets. We came up with these questions and we would stand outside masjids around Cambridge and then London and then eventually around the country. Yeah. Just interviewing people and asking them key questions. Do you care about Islamic banking? Do you care about Islamic finance? And then also, do you currently use anything? And if not, why? We ended up interviewing 3,000 people. And the results were really compelling. 95% of people told us that they really strongly desired an alternative to conventional financial services. Yeah. They cared about avoiding riba. 95%. But then when we asked them, are you currently doing anything about it? Are you using any of these Islamic banks or these fintechs that are coming up? Yeah. And only 3% of them said, yeah, they are. 3%.
Yeah, it's astonishing.
So what is going on, right? Like what is actually happening? When we asked them why, the top three reasons that came up time and time again: poor user experiences offered by the banks and the fintechs that were out there, poor customer service. Of those, they often talked about when they were engaging with these entities, it felt like they were talking with a company from another country or from years ago. Or, I mean, you experienced this yourself with a bank, an Islamic bank, where I remember once you were just stuck on the underground because your debit cards just stopped working.
Yeah, it wouldn't touch me in.
So things like that, right? Like it felt like we were having to really pay in some way just for aligning with our faiths. And the final thing was, weirdly, awareness. A lot of people just didn't know what was out there, right? Unless you lived in East London where you saw a branch of Al Rayyan Bank or maybe you heard about it from your parents or your grandparents in some way. Most people didn't know what was going on. So we saw there's a real problem. Should we do something about it? And I want to say the answer was immediately yes, but it was a little bit more winding than that. But I don't want to take away from your questioning.
Sure, no, but it's a good intro to, I guess, why Kestrl came about, which is where I was going with this. So obviously eventually you did come to decide that you do want to solve this. I guess that what you saw in the survey was the motivation for that, but what was the solution?
Well, how did that September came along. Yeah. We graduated. Yeah. I had secured a job at PwC And I went along to it. And alhamdulillah, it was amazing. It was like my dream position. It was within a new team called Digital Transformation and Wealth Management. So our whole thing was helping big wealth managers to actually launch their own consumer apps, retail propositions, robo-advisors, so we worked on some really important, really exciting things to do with that. But again, it wasn't solving that issue that I had, which was how do I align my faith and really take advantage of the gifts and the privileges that I'd been afforded. But meanwhile, we'd gotten these results, and Dayeng, he talks about it a lot in the survey. He had opted to not go back to the job that he had in Malaysia and to stay here and to really figure this out with Kestrl. So he was doing all kinds of things, working nights and evenings and delivery jobs and cleaning and all of that, whilst together we built this business model for what it would be. And we also thought we're going to have to raise money. There's all kinds of debates raging about do you need to raise funds or not? For a fintech, the answer is almost quite clear in front of you, just because there's a certain amount of money you need to actually build and develop the actual technology. But the biggest actual cost comes from the licensing.
Right.
Because if you're dealing with people's money, if you're holding it, if you're distributing it, if you're investing it, you need to become licensed. And that's not
the FCA.
Yeah.
The FCA regulated activity.
From the Financial Conduct Authority. So those things were quite difficult to attain. So in this time, we really got it knocked out of us. We created a pitch deck of what the idea was for Kestrl.
Yeah.
And very simply at the time, it was, we're going to help Muslims to grow their wealth in a halal way.
Right.
And at the time, we were going to be a digital bank.
Yeah.
Right? Just also almost like a Monzo for Muslims. But the idea was that we were eventually going to offer new products like mortgages. We were super inspired by Fider, who are then known as Primary Finance. So check out the episode we did with them.
Yeah.
So we thought eventually we're going to offer products like that, and that's how we'll make money. But we'll just do what Monzo did, what Revolut did, what Starling did. And basically we got, our heads bashed in by the investors that we were pitching to.
Right.
Where we would either not receive a response entirely, or the responses that we did receive were basically, this is too niche, right? You're trying to do something that has not been proven by these other digital banks, but worse, you're going for a much smaller percentage of the population. There's about 5 million Muslims in the United Kingdom, of which only about half of them are over the age of 18, right? And then of those, how many of them are going to go for this? And then marketing activities and all the costs required. People were just not seeing it.
Right.
And they were right. Had we done that, and we've seen that from, sadly, our competitors at the time who were trying to do digital banks, none of them are around today, especially not in the form that they're in.
Yeah.
So we went back to the drawing board and we thought, what can we do? What is the most cost-effective thing that still helps us to meet our mission of helping Muslims grow their wealth, but is a lot cheaper than us going down this digital banking route, because digital banking is super expensive.
Yeah.
Right. For context, Monzo's first round was 10 million.
Wow.
And that was just to launch a few cards. In that. So there was a really cool regulation we took advantage of in the UK called open banking. So in the United Kingdom, every person has the right to expose their banking data to third parties.
Yeah.
Right. It's all about data ownership, you taking control of your own data, large entities not controlling it. And we ended up getting our own open banking license. And what that meant was you didn't have to move money into the Kestrl app. You could just plug in your bank account. Barclays, HSBC, Monzo, which the majority of Muslims were using, plug it in, we could see your data, and we could create a personal financial plan just for you. Let's see your salary, and let's figure out how much of it can and should you be actually saving by actually categorizing all of your transactions into essentials, your non-essentials, and ultimately how much you should save. Let's then put it into action. Let's create a savings plan. Tell us what you want to save for. Maybe it's a car, a house, or a wedding, or to go on pilgrimage, on Hajj. And we will make sure you're pulling in money regularly, every month or week, or rounding up your spare change, putting it into these ring-fence pots of money to help you save to it. And then crucially, we would link you with Sharia-compliant savings and investment products. So we opened this marketplace, which allowed you to invest in anything from property to gold to even just the stock market. As well. We also had faith-aligned features. So we had an auto zakat calculator. We could see all of your finances. So something which is usually quite a difficult process, calculating 2.5% of your net worth. We could do that with the touch of a button.
Yeah.
And also Sharia stock and fund screening. So a lot of people are very interested in buying shares in Amazon or Google or Apple, but they don't know if it's Sharia compliant.
Right.
And again, we could look into all of the data available, all of the financial reports and metrics to see where the revenue was coming from. Was it from any non-Sharia compliant activity? As well as looking at the balance sheet to see how much interest was actually being generated or held by this company and tell you whether it's Sharia compliant. So that's what Kestrl was, the Muslim money app, doing all these different things.
All right, a one-stop shop, if you like.
Exactly, and it was on that idea that we managed to get funding.
Right. Okay.
Right. So we used to just hang out. You remember?
Yeah.
We went out to Istanbul.
Yes.
In the end of 2019. Was it? November 2019.
Yes. I wanted to actually mention this in my podcast, but I forgot because that was a part of my story as well. But yeah, that was sort of the beginning in many ways of both of us in our sort of parallel.
It was. We booked some flights,
Yeah.
me, you, and our father, and we flew out to Istanbul for this large Islamic finance conference which was being run by Salam Gateway.
Gateway Global. By Haris Irfan and Ashley Freeman. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. Gateway Global. And this was, by Ashley Freeman, Haris Irfan, Abdul Hasib.
He was there.
Yeah, as well. So it was really cool because this was our first exposure to like the real heavyweights and founding fathers almost of Islamic finance in this country.
Yeah.
And we met people like Haris Irfan, who, was responsible. He was over at Deutsche Bank and then Barclays, and he invented models which allowed them to actually finance. He regrets this now, but allows them to finance a lot of the construction in Makkah, including the clock tower. And we also met Sultan Chowdhury, who was the former CEO of Islamic Bank of Britain, now Arayan Bank. And these guys got it. They liked the idea, and they were willing to actually put forward some of their money. And that was our first actual investment round.
Yeah.
So we raised about £150,000, which alhamdulillah allowed us to go full time. So I quit my job at PwC, and Dying and I came on board. We also, our father came on as chief financial officer. We found a plucky CTO who's a 2-time founder himself, Irfan Radzi, who used to go to school with Dying.
Yeah,
and
likes burgers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he used to own a burger place. And we also had Dr. Musab Shaharam, who became our head of data. Yeah. And you were in the story as well as our head of legal.
Yeah.
Right? So all of these people came together to build the early version of Kestrl. And I really must stress it was a shoestring budget. Most of that money went into development and licensing costs. So we didn't have a lot to function on. It was not glamorous.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And that obviously explains the need for, I believe it's called the e-money license rather than the,
that's right.
the regulated banking license. Yeah. And if I understand correctly, that also, in a way, prohibits you as an entity from actually taking your client's money and lending it out.
That's right.
Was that a coincidental meeting of the minds as to aligning the business with?
No, I think so. Yeah, it was coincidental, and that it is Sharia compliant because you can't do anything with it.
Right.
But it was also exactly what Monzo and Revolut and Starling had done as a track to getting a banking license. But we really focused more on the open banking than the electronic money side of things because we saw this interesting potential with using data to create a personalized experience.
So the budgeting,
for Muslim customers,
savings, investments.
Yeah, exactly. No one was doing that. Even to this day, I don't think anyone's doing it the way that we do for Muslims in particular. Thank you for listening to Muslim Money Talk. If you like what you've heard so far, you might be interested in checking out what we do at Kestrl, the Muslim Money app. Kestrl is a service that helps Muslims who want to grow their wealth without having to compromise, whether it's on their belief or user experience or price. I founded Kestrl because of how fed up I was at how poor Islamic financial services were in this country. Often people didn't use them because of how bad the user experience or customer service, and indeed how high on price they were. So Kestrl was the answer to that. If you download the Kestrl app today, it can help you by creating a budgeting plan. Plug in whatever bank account you have and it will create an auto budget just for you. You can then tell us what goals you're saving for and we'll save towards them automatically into pots, and then crucially link you towards Sharia compliant investment and savings products as well. So download Kestrl today and try it out for yourself. Now back to the podcast.
I appreciate the sort of all-in-one aspects of it, but today especially we have a number of Islamic fintechs. They seem to operate in slightly different client sectors. We have the home financing ones. Yeah. We have wealth building, wealth generation. So, and Kestrl is doing, bits of sort of everything. So where do you see Kestrl's role within that? Is Kestrl an intermediary between those? Is it sort of independent of those? How would you categorize Kestrl as an Islamic fintech?
So it's a really interesting question. So Wahid Invest, for example, was really focused on the endpoint, which was helping people to invest their money in a Sharia compliant way. And they'd built their own portfolios to do that. And then you had people like FIDA, which were helping people to achieve a major life goal, which was to purchase a home, which for a lot of people is a big, big milestone.
Yeah.
But no one was doing the education piece.
Right.
People really, really struggled with that, with the financial education. And there was inspiration that we took from a famous hadith about tying your camel. And we used to use this expression a lot at Kestrl and stuff that we were building, which was tie your camel before you invest. And this refers to the famous hadith where a man, I think he was slightly confused by the nature of God and predestination and fate and all of that. And he went to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, should I just get off my camel and leave it untied? Or should I tie it because, ultimately it's in Allah. Should I just trust in Allah that the camel is going to remain there, whether I tie it or not? Because it's all predestined. And the response was very interesting, and we use it in a number of facets of our life today. And the response from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was to tie your camel and trust in Allah.
Yeah.
The idea is that you should make all necessary precautions and preparations yourself. And only then should you leave the remainder, the true unknown out there, to God.
Yeah.
That's what it was. And I think the same is very, very true to financial services. Everyone was so interested in investing. How do I invest? How do I invest? How do I invest? And when we were looking and we would assess these people and we'd be like, Abdullah, not a real Abdullah, but just in case, like, Abdullah, you're not even saving any money, salary every month. You haven't built up an emergency fund for, God forbid you lose your job, but it happens. You haven't built that up. And then what are you investing for? Oh, you want to buy a house? You're much better off saving your money for buying a house than investing towards that. People were not knowing these basics.
Yeah.
And that's really what we were trying to fulfill. It was the beginning stages, right, of the people's financial journey.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, what is the tying your camel part? Let's build a budget for you. Make sure you're actually able to save some money, right? That your expenditures are not inordinately on non-essential type things like eating out, right? Or maybe you're paying for multiple subscriptions of things that you don't need, right? A lot of people, you'd be shocked when we see the data how many people have multiple Netflix subscriptions and they don't even know, right? Are you actually saving towards an emergency fund, a rainy day fund, which could be 3 months, 6 months, 12 months of your typical spending behavior, but just enough of a pot that you feel comfortable that I could go and find another job within this period. After that, figure out your goals, right? What are they? Is it a house? Is it marriage? Is it having a school? Is it sending kids to school? And are they short-term or long-term? Are they goals that you're going to achieve in the next 5 years, which would make them short-term? If so, save towards those things. Save towards those things because if you invest, especially if you're investing in the stock markets, things can fluctuate. If you look, especially at the time, if you look at the financial markets just before and then after COVID was announced and lockdowns were announced, the market crashed, right? And if you had been saving to buy a house and all of your money had been in some sort of Sharia fund, which just tracked S&P, you would have been ruined, right? At that time, you would have lost the house that you were looking to purchase. So the reason we say save for the short term is because in the short term, things can fluctuate a lot. But generally in the long term, if you're investing into an asset which is well tracked and well known, whether it's investing into the stock exchange or looking at gold and to an extent, Bitcoin as well, but that's a topic for a different time. Generally, things are going to move upwards and to the right. Right. You can look at that for the price of gold. You can look at that for the stock market, a number of different assets. So the idea is that if you're looking at achieving a goal in 20 years' time, which typically is retirement or sending children to school, invest for those things, right? Because you'll see short-term fluctuations, but in the long term, it will be okay. So that's the kind of the tying your camel part, right? Before you leave the rest to Allah and you trust in Allah, but you have to make those necessary precautions and preparations yourself.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, in the psychology of wealth, there's this concept, an economic theory of bounded rationality, that consumers or economic agents have certain biases at a cognitive level that actually restrict them from making optimal choices for themselves.
sure.
And it's interesting because it means like no matter how much you input, no matter how much you tie the camel, there is also the other aspect, which aligns with our values of, leaving the rest to Allah, to God.
For sure.
So which I find very interesting.
Yeah, Morgan Housel writes about this this concept. It's an amazing book called The Psychology of Money. We talked about it with Niaz's in Niaz's podcast as well a lot. But the idea that a lot of people assume that money and wealth is a science, but in reality, the way we act is much more of a soft skill. Right, and the way that you're raised, the way that your parents felt about money and what they did with money, the economic environment that you were raised in, whether it was high interest rates or high inflation, can really affect what you're likely to do and your risk appetite. Right, people who were raised with very low interest environments are much more open to investing. Because that was really the only way to make money. Yeah. And the converse is true as well. If it was a higher interest environment, people are much more likely to put their money in the bank, right? Whether or not it makes sense at the time.
Yeah, it would be ironic to do so in that environment, I suppose. But yeah, okay. So that's a very helpful overview as to what Kestrl is and
that's how it started. But I will say we were struggling in those early days. Yeah, we were. I mean, we had, alhamdulillah, tens of thousands of customers, but we hadn't figured out monetization. We hadn't. And we were making a bit of money, but it certainly wasn't enough to sustain us. Yeah. And I had gotten married at the time. So this is now fast forwarding to 2021, the end of 2021. And alhamdulillah, to the outside world, Kestrl looked like a success because we were posting on socials and we'd done launch events and we were growing the team and all of that. But the reality was I hadn't taken a salary and our co-founders had not taken a salary in around, at that point, about 4 months. Wow. Because we were just putting all that money in and hoping we'd be able to raise some more funds or crack the monetization angle. And very naively, we thought that this was going to come about. So we were just not taking a salary to extend our runway, the lifespan of the company. But it was dark days. Yeah. It was very, very dark days. And I just remember coming home one day and just thinking, have I made a huge mistake? Yeah. What if this doesn't work? What if this didn't work out? And then we found out, my wife, Sabah, we found out we were expecting. Oh. And subhanAllah, I was immediately ecstatic, really, really happy. But then immediately I thought, how am I going to provide for this child? Yeah. What is going to happen? I left, alhamdulillah, a very, very comfortable position in a world-renowned company to do this. Not just that, but I'd brought all these people on this journey with me. All the employees, all the customers, all our shareholders as well. Yeah. And then something honestly incredible happened, something I'd never expected. And for me, it was the hand of God at play, which was from an early conversation we'd had months ago. The largest Islamic bank in Malaysia, Bank Islam, the CEO reached out to us. Muazzam, who was actually our guest on episode number 1
yes,
of this
I remember.
podcast. He reached out and said, we like what you're doing. We're trying to launch our own digital bank. And we would like to use your platform and what you've done to help us accelerate and get there more quickly. We want to basically pay a subscription service for your technology and integrate all of your features, everything you built, into our own digital bank so we can go live with features from day one.
And that's the B2B side.
Exactly, business to business. That's how that was born. And it wasn't, if I was differently minded, maybe I would say that was always the plan. Yeah. Right? But subhanAllah, it really wasn't the plan. Yeah. It wasn't the plan at all. It wasn't something we ever saw for ourselves because we go back to our mission. We wanted to help Muslims to grow their wealth in a Sharia compliant way. Yeah. And when we were confronted with this proposition, we thought, is this still what we want to do? Was this why we started this business? And ultimately it is. It's the same. You're still helping Muslims, but you're doing it through a third party, which is a large Islamic bank. And we went from being on our knees, not taking a salary or anything, to subhanAllah, after that being month-on-month profitable, being getting investors knocking on our door, being able to invest more into our application. And I really think it came through first trusting in Allah, but secondly finding out that we were expecting a baby. Because as we know, every child is proportioned their own risk, their own what's the translation for risk?
Sustenance.
Their own sustenance.
Provision,
right? Their own provision, whether that's wealth or opportunities or whatever it is. But every person in this life is proportioned that. Yeah. And I think when that child came, they were being allocated that risk through the success of the business.
SubhanAllah,
SubhanAllah. And
The recipient came before the means, but the recipient...
I say this to people who are saying, look, I don't know if I should get married now. I don't know if we should have children, because honestly, Allah can provide in ways for you that you would never imagine.
Yeah.
I would never imagine that was going to happen. And subhanAllah, that changed everything, not just for me, but for our company.
Yeah. I know what you mean, that sometimes you sort of feel like you're on a path which is slowly unfolding before you, or you're on a book which has several pages, and you can't see what's on the next page, but you just know that you're turning it. And that's sort of the way I see, fate and qadr, destination, unraveling for us in our stories. And subhanAllah, it sounds like that came to the benefit ultimately and survival of Kestrl as a business. So that's a really great way to answer quite a few of my questions on this. Actually, I was going to ask you about challenges being living as a CEO, as a Muslim, and you've covered, I guess, the bulk of them. The name though, Kestrl, is something that might be quite enigmatic to people. So do you want to shed a little bit of light
enigmatic?
On that?
Yeah. I mean, look. Kestrl, for people who don't know, is the name of a little bird, a little falcon that lives in this country. And some people are familiar with it if they're like wildlife enthusiasts like myself. Other people know about it if they read books in school like Kestrel for a Knave, or they saw the movie Kes. But it's the smallest falcon that exists in this country, and it's found around the world. Why did we call it Kestrl? Do you want the real answer, or like the answer we have on the website and things?
I mean, I want the genuine.
Okay, the genuine answer was, we thought at the time, we don't want Kestrl to just be for Muslims. We want to benefit everyone, and we don't want to exclude anyone by giving it a very Muslim sounding name.
Yeah.
So we came up with ideas like Ethipe and
I remember. I was a big fan of the Ethipe name.
I know, but the feedback was it sounded like dog food, or something like that. So
there was Tiger. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I really pushed for Tiger.
TIGR.
Yeah. And then TYG, which I'm still a fan of, right? If we can rebrand, I'd be up for it. Let us know in the comments if you're up for that. I think powerful animal, the real king of the jungle.
Yeah.
But for the reason for Kestrl is actually because Kestrels eat a lot of things, including starlings. And the idea was, we're going to come after Starling Bank, right? We're going to take out Starling Bank and we're going to replace it and all of that. So it started off as a little bit of a joke, but it turns out people like the name. So we stuck with it. And we took out the E, so it's Kestrl, because the domain name wasn't available and the branding wasn't available, but Kestrl was. And it sounded a bit more techy, and that's the real answer for how we came up with the name, and that's what Kestrl is. Right. We went back on that, actually, because originally we were really branding it as an ethical brand. And I think if you go back in the Wayback Machine, you can see the original websites and all of that.
Strapline was very different back then.
What was the strapline?
I think it was something like... it wasn't budget, save, and invest without compromising on your values. It was something like
bank without compromises.
It was grow your wealth in a way that is interest-free and ethical payment and wealth services provider.
It wasn't very snappy.
No,
but that was the original. And we found something interesting was happening. Muslims were coming to the website and they weren't seeing anything really directed towards them.
Yeah,
and they would just think,
Is this really Muslims?
Is this
it
me?
Don't see the word Sharia in here.
Yeah, exactly. And then non-Muslims were coming in and seeing a little hint of halal, right? They'd see like, oh, there's a Sharia advisor, and they'd see all this. And then they would just be like, well, what is this? It's not for me. And then we just decided, let's be true to ourselves.
Yeah. We
were built by Muslims, for the Ummah, and to leave a legacy. So we rebranded ourselves to Kestrl, the Muslim money app. And subhanAllah, had we not done that, then the Islamic banks who we work with today would not have found us, to be honest, right? They wouldn't have really seen, okay, this is a fintech, but focused on Muslims who can also help us out, right? So we chose to do that, to double down on it. But I do feel, and we talked about this in our podcast a little bit as well, that if Islamic finance is truly successful, I think it is a true rebuttal and alternative to the existing economic system, which ultimately is proving and continues to prove to this day, as we're like on the brink of another financial crisis. And there's been so many in the past in our lifetimes.
Yeah, it's a detrimental system.
It's detrimental to society, to people in general. And if Islamic finance is done right, it has a built-in welfare system, right, which can look after everyone. It ultimately abhors the idea of making money on money, right? And entrenching people and societies in debt, in cycles of debt that they will never escape from, right? The US has so much debt now that it will never ever be able to repay it. It has more debt than it has actual dollars in existence. How does that make any sense?
Yeah.
But anyway, that's a topic for a different
No,
time.
but it's an interesting one because I remember at the start when those conversations were happening, as it happened, I was always in favor of it being Muslim focused, at least to begin with. You know, the idea of you got to clean your own rug before, you know, anyone else's. And I probably butchered that idiom. But what would you say, though, is the appeal for people of other faiths and none of Kestrl? I appreciate the budgeting aspect is not uniquely Muslim.
So,
but, you know, they could argue they could find that elsewhere. So what is the universality of it?
Something really interesting happened.
Yeah.
We took part in Muslim Tech Fest in London this year. And we had, you were there, you were manning the stall. We had a big touchscreen TV where people could interact with the app and play around with things and see what they liked. And we would ask them things. We would question them and ask them their opinions. And in that survey, we asked similar questions. Do you care about Islamic finance? This time, about 85% said that they did. But then we asked them, do you care about boycotting? Because this is very, very topical, still is right now.
Yeah.
Right. It's a very emotive issue. What's going on in that part of the world, in the Middle East, boycotting brands, especially the likes of McDonald's and Starbucks. And it's showing that it is reaping benefits. But do people care about moving their money and divesting their money from those types of corporations who are shown to support Israel?
Yeah.
And lo and behold, close to 100% of people said they felt very, very strongly about it. So the new product that we've been working on and which is going to launch a couple of weeks after this episode comes out, but if you download Kestrl today, you will be able to benefit from it, is a boycott tracker.
Right.
Where you will be able to instantly see how much of your salary is going towards companies which are on the boycott list, on the BDS official sanctions list, and then be presented with alternatives to allow you to move your money away from that. And I think that's one of the examples of how Islamic finance is not just a way of adhering to your faith, but ultimately should be a way about bettering society for
as a whole.
As a whole.
Yeah.
As a whole, absolutely. And I think that is one of the key things if we can get it right. And alhamdulillah, you know, we soft launched it on socials. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. And I think we're the first people to actually use open banking in this way. So we're really looking forward to launching that.
Okay, so that's coming out in the near future.
It'll be in December, inshallah.
In December. Yeah, next month. Oh, inshallah.
Yeah.
Anything else on the horizon for 2025 for Kestrl?
Yeah, we're going to be launching in Saudi. So we're very excited about that, inshallah. And another really, really big thing, which I look forward to talking about closer to the time, but I think it will impact the UK Islamic finance space in a way that it hasn't been impacted in a long time.
Okay. You can't say what it is yet?
I can't say. I really can't say right now.
Okay, interesting.
Inshallah, I will be able to in future episodes.
Okay. It's nothing that we were exhibiting at the Muslim Tech Fest, is it? Because...
No.
Oh, okay. Because then in that case, I do want to touch on this concept of AI. You know, you can talk about it in more detail, but this idea of sort of in-building an AI Sharia advisor.
Yeah, that is something that we showcased.
It's something that it is indeed, yeah.
Kestrl GPT, or as we affectionately called it, the AI Mufti.
AI Mufti. So it's a controversial topic and, you know, potentially one for a separate podcast. But what exactly is the idea there? And do you think that there needs to be any checks and balances associated
For sure,
with
yeah.
it?
I mean, I think what we built, and we built this in collaboration with the Financial Conduct Authority in the sandbox, because it is a tricky issue, not just on the faith side, but on the investment management side and advice side as well. Can you take investment advice from an AI tool? So the idea here is that you would not only be able to ask this AI any question you want about Islamic finance or finance, but also about your own personal finances.
Right.
What is my situation? How much money do I actually save? Could I be getting any more savings by moving away from non-essential activities or unnecessary subscriptions? And ultimately asking it, where should you be investing your money in a Sharia compliant way? So we showcased the early version of it, which thankfully was received very, very positively. And we did that recently. We demoed it with the FCA as well. In terms of the checks and balances, so as people who are in the space in GPT know, the AI does have a propensity to sometimes make things up and move away and take inspiration from other sources. It does do that every so often. You can test it out on ChatGPT or on X has their own version as well, I think called Grok. But you can ask it the same question multiple times at different times of the day, and the answers aren't always the same.
Right.
And that is very, very important when it comes to asking about Islamic finance or Sharia law in general.
Yeah, and fiqh in general.
Which is meant to be completely conserved. It cannot be changed in any way.
Well, the application of it might be
sure.
to different circumstances, but yeah, the inputs and the, I guess, answers to specific questions might be. And it's interesting because I suppose looking at it, from a non-technical perspective, if you're inputting all of the Quran and Sunnah into this AI and existing fatwa from, let's say, classical ulama, and you then ask a question, a fiqh question to the AI, it's an interesting thought experiment. Would this AI mufti be able to deliver a satisfactory answer? And to my mind, I don't think so, because fatwa and iftar, the process of generating a verdict in response to a question of Islamic law, does not just involve those key primary sources and inputs, but there's also an element of rationality and intellect, as we call it.
Yeah, that's the thing.
And I don't know, obviously that the extent of that is limited and caveated by the use of revelation, but even revelation is being filtered through your own and other scholars' own intellect. I'm not convinced that AI necessarily can replicate.
No,
that
it may
process.
not have the rationality as of yet, but I feel like every other week there is a new breakthrough when it comes to artificial intelligence, and I think we need to have a special episode specifically around that. Ben Affleck weirdly had a very interesting take on it. Weirdly,
okay,
right? So he was being asked this in the context of what happens if actors are completely replaced, or editors and film writers and all of that will be replaced by AI one day.
Right.
And he said, I'm going to completely butcher what he said, but the idea was that yes, it could make something incredible, right? Something so visually appealing, the likes that you've never seen before, but a real artist knows when to stop, when something goes from being a masterpiece to being tacky, right? And the AI doesn't quite have that taste as of yet. So, apply that as you will within the Islamic finance space.
Yeah.
I thought that was an interesting take.
No, definitely. Yeah, maybe we can get an expert on that for a future podcast episode.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay, so, we're coming a little bit close to time, but I do want to ask, in our podcast episode, we talked a lot about the origins of seeing, whether you want to call it Islamic finance or at least just finance in a halal way in practice among the early generations. Is there any particular story amongst the, either the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam or even the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself that particularly inspire you or interest you?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about this a lot, but a lot of things happened during the Hijrah when the Muslims were forced to flee from Makkah to Medina and take refuge in that city. There's two stories which really inspired me, I think, which really show the power of financial literacy and also go against this idea that wealth is something that we need to abhor, and that Muslims cannot be wealthy and religious. And I don't know when this came about in our history, but we even talked about this in the last podcast episode with Qazi, where his father was an imam and he thought his sons were too focused on making money, which is an interesting thing to think about. But it does come up quite a lot in our culture, and it's so interesting and important for us because Muslims in this country and in many parts of the world make up some of the most impoverished religious communities that there are. So in the UK, almost 50% of Muslims actually live below the poverty line, struggling to pay at least one of their bills, or even taking advantage of food banks, which is crazy. But despite that, Muslims are by far the most generous and donate the most to charity out of any religious group, right? Whether it's through their zakat or their sadaqah donations every Friday, at Jummah, whatever it might be, they pay far and above all the other religious groups combined, right? Yeah. So what is going on? And if we look back at the time of the Sahaba when they were forced to go from Makkah to Medina, there's two very interesting things. The first is when the Muslims first arrived in Medina, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the first thing he asked them to build was what?
Firstly, a mosque.
A masjid. Correct. A place to pray, which seems, you wouldn't immediately think, oh, that's weird.
Yeah.
What was the second thing?
It was a market.
A marketplace. Yeah. A marketplace. So even then it was understood to this group of travelers who had left everything behind and come with just what they could carry to this new city, that they had to be financially independent. They had to be independent. And the way to do that was through building wealth again. And through that came power and privilege and a standing in society. So that was really interesting to me. The second is the story about Uthman radiallahu anhu and the well. And this idea that investing can actually last not just for you, for your children, but for a millennia. And this story really like shook me to my core. So at the time, the Makkans, the Muslims who had come from Makkah, were used to fresh water from the famous well of Zamzam. And when they came to Medina, the best well and the best water supply was in the control of a non-Muslim, a Jewish man, who would charge people for the smallest handful of water. And it became such a serious situation that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ actually approached the man and said, I can't buy the well from you, but if you grant us access to the well, I can promise you a place in paradise. Now, obviously, this didn't work with the guy, but Uthman radiallahu anhu heard about this and realized he needed to do something about it. And he is, by today's standards, people have calculated, would likely have been close to or perhaps even a billionaire if you were to convert his wealth to
net wealth,
today, in net wealth. So he approached the man and began the negotiation. And in the end, he managed to purchase 50% of the well, a 50% ownership stake in the well for the sum of 20,000 dirhams, which was a huge amount at the time, a huge fortune. And the agreement was that he would own the well on one day, and on the other day, the original owner, the Jewish man, would own the well, and they would run the wells as they like on each day. So on the day that the Jewish owner ran it, he would charge people every day. But on the day that Uthman radiallahu anhu ran it, what do you think he did?
Gave it for free.
He just gave it for free for everyone. So everyone came on that day, and they would take as much water as they needed, and then they would never come on the day that they had to pay for it. So this was, I think this speaks to the negotiating power and the business and commercial mindset of the early Muslims. But it ended up with the other owner ended up selling the rest of the well over to the Muslims, over to Uthman radiallahu anhu.
It was no longer profitable to him.
It wasn't profitable for him to keep it, but he made his money when he sold the rest of it. So the other Muslims began to make their own money, and then they came to Uthman radiallahu anhu and they said, "Thank you so much for what you did. We want to buy this back from you." And he would refuse. And they eventually ended up offering twice what he ended up paying for the well. And he said no. And what he asked for was, they said, well, then who could offer a higher price than this?
Yeah.
And he said, Allah. And that was it. And it's a beautiful story because the well continued, right? The Muslims eventually went back to Makkah, but the well remained. The waters were used to feed the date palms that grew around it. The dates were sold. 50% of the wealth was actually used, went to charity. 50% was reinvested back into the project. And then years passed. The years became decades, centuries, until whole empires, Muslim empires, whoever was in control of the area would look after the well.
Yeah.
And this well and its wealth exists to this day.
Yeah. Wow.
And the money from that is stored in a bank account, which is ascribed to Uthman radiallahu anhu, and that money, that investment, is actually used to finance a lot of the building work that happens around Makkah, which allows the people to go on pilgrimage and live there and keep moving. And what's insane is that the money that's generated annually is estimated to be the equivalent to about 50 million USD a year, which makes it not only the oldest, but arguably the most profitable asset and investment of all time.
Yeah.
So subhanAllah, I think it really speaks to the power of financial literacy. It's Uthman radiallahu anhu certainly used his wealth and his privilege to not just benefit himself and his akhirah, his afterlife, but to benefit all of society. And I think it really speaks to us, right? We have privileges.
Yeah.
We have unfair advantages. We have skills and talents. We should be using those things to follow in the footsteps of the giants who came before us, to take control of our finances, invest in our future, and ultimately for our akhirahs.
Inshallah. Yeah, no, it's a remarkable story. The ultimate waqf, or perpetual endowment.
Yes. Yeah, that's what it's called today. It's called a waqf, charitable endowment.
Ongoing until this day. SubhanAllah, I wish we could go on further, but I think
we're out of time.
We're out of time. So thank you so much for coming on for my first hosted podcast episode. Hoping to make a reappearance at some point. Maybe we can have a rota going on. I don't know, but it's been a privilege, a pleasure. So Jazakallah khair, Areeb, and look forward to the next episode.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you for listening to the Muslim Money Talk podcast. If you like what you heard, then please subscribe to Muslim Money Talk wherever you might have been listening to this. Give us a like and share it with someone who you think might be interested. It really, really helps us out. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, and see you next time.